Now, Sandy Thurlow has been my role model and inspiration ever since I started working with the Martin County Historic Preservation Board back in 2012. And Sandy was a major player in saving and restoring the Captain Sewell House from demolition. She obtained the county and private funds to restore the house. She then gave personal tours of the Captain Sewell's house for many years. How many of you have been to the Captain Sewell's house? Great, great. So Bruce and I have had the honor of portraying Captain and Abby Sewell in period dress while giving tours at the house for the past 6 years. We have shared Sandy's PowerPoint presentation and given tours to hundreds of people eager to learn about the Sewell family history and Martin County pioneer history. Sandy has written numerous pictorial books on Sewell's Point, Stewart on the St. Lucie, Jensen Beach, the House of Refuge, and the Life-Saving Services of Florida, and is now working on the history of Palm City book. In fact, her books are on that back table to peruse. You could purchase them at the Stewart Heritage Museum, downtown, the feed store, or you can check them out at the library here. In these books, she showcases, I'm sorry, I hit the button. I'm sorry, can I go back? There, sorry. In these books, she showcases photographs collected from pioneer families and community leaders. Painstaking research augments information obtained from personal interviews. Sandy's late husband, Tom, was a Stewart attorney who also wrote a book on the history of early attorneys of Stewart. I have had the honor of working with her daughter, Jackie Thurlow Lippisch, through the Rivers Coalition and River Kids. Her son, Todd, is also an attorney, is on the board of the Rivers Coalition and provides real-time data on the Lake Okeechobee and St. Lucie water quality at the Rivers Coalition monthly meetings. And her third child, Jenny, is married to Mike Flau, the landscape architect, and her granddaughter was one of the original, Evie, was one of the original River Kids that started that program. Now, in 2011, Sandy was given the very first Martin County Preservationist of the Year award presented by the Martin County Historic Preservation Board. In January of this year, Sandy was given the Kiplinger Literacy Award by Knight Kiplinger from the Library Foundation of Martin County. Sandy's extensive collections and photos of Stewart and Martin County are being digitized through the Martin County Library System. Thank you, Georgian. She's our archivist. If you have any great family pictures, bring them up and give them to her. She'll put them on and anybody can access it then. So I want to thank Sandy for being here, and you're my role model.
I just got so excited because it's been a year since I gave a program for the Gen Society, and they advertise these enough that I do get a crowd, and I was able to have people in the crowd that brought photographs and were connected with old families, and it was totally thrilling for me. And then I've had a lot of activity as a result of the connections that I made that last year. And I just wanted to share you just a couple of them. A lady was sitting right up front. Her name was Mary Lee Reese, and she was the granddaughter, here, this shines, doesn't it, on that, yep. The granddaughter of Frank Coventry. And this little guy, Frank Coventry, had such a background. And her mother gave me photographs that I've used in my books. And when I met Mary Lee, I said, well, May Axtell was, and that was her mother. So Mary Lee, last year, had like a cigar box full of old photographs. And I got so excited because I was afraid they'd get away from me. And so she followed me home, and I copied them. And then later she gave them to our Martin Digital History. But this is, and Georgian will know about this is Edith Coventry, and she was a photographer in the early days. And many of the photographs that the family shares with us, and now we have in Martin Digital History, came from her. And she was quite a woman. But this lovely portrait, you can tell they were a very comfortable family, and then they came here, and they built these buildings. First the Coventry Hotel, and then Coventry Apartments. And what is so wonderful is that they still stand. And they're now the old Colorado Inn complex of buildings. And I have to say that Joe, he got this early, and he said, Sandy, you have some misspellings and wrong dates and that. And I had Steve's name misspelled. And somehow he corrected it, even though it was already packaged for PowerPoint. So I really appreciate that. But this, if you read it, you will see why it's so important. And this is a picture that Mary Lee had. And these pictures, people had we hadn't seen a picture of her uncle. And this is a picture of him. And he's he worked at the railroad station, and there he is. Look at the old-fashioned way we had to communicate. He was the telegraph. And then there was a man in the crowd that was a McPherson. This in the corner where it says McPherson, we have used this picture to invite people to Old Timers Day, and it was of the children that were here in 1926, and they marched in the parade celebrating the Martin County, which was 100 years ago, just about. So this guy right here is the dad of the guy that was in the audience, and here he is. I had never met him or his dad, but he had a book that I had inscribed to his dad. The dad lived in Orlando at the time, and a neighbor heard that he was from an old family. But it was so exciting to me to meet him and have him bring that book. And he said the book meant so much to his father, and that's why I do this. I really love it. And then in the audience that day, my program was on the Stipmans. And I have always just loved this picture. And the Stipmans, he adopted a girl named Amanda. His wife had already been married. And this is Amanda. And this boy was Esther Hare's father. And she lives in Okeechobee, and she and her son came all the way to my program. And so I just thought that was wonderful. So now we'll get to Pump City. I got started on this while my husband was still alive and needing my attention all the time. But this woman who, she has a hard-to-pronounce last name. Her husband is Iranian, but it's Kashavas, Lucy Kashavas. She's a lovely woman. And she has this company that's Art and Culture Group, but she's in West Palm. And she got hired by Martin County to do the Ripples project. And she wanted pictures of Palm City to put on this gazebo. And she came to my house, and she went to the Historical Society of Martin County. She went to the Stuart Heritage Museum. And then she got what I had and used them for this exhibit that just was installed about 2 months ago, and it is lovely, and it's some of the same pictures I am using in my book. But she was a catalyst, and I thought, I have all this stuff. I need to get it into a book because I am the go-to person because I'm so old now and I know all these people. So this particular, and I could talk and bore you on each picture has a story of how you acquired it. But my husband had a client named Ted Catherton, whose grandparents were Palm City pioneers. Their name was Oles. And then they moved to Stuart, like a lot of people from Palm City ended up in Stuart. and had a very old house on St. Lucie Crescent. And so he had these photographs, and he allowed us to make copies when he was settling the estate. Unfortunately, that old house got into a big controversy because of addition, and it had to be demolished. So that part is sad. But this is a really great photograph, and I wanted to go back to get a better copy when I decided to do a book. But he has passed away, and his wife had no, didn't know where they were. So I had to use what I had. But look at this. You can see an old car, and the people were taken around Palm City in a buggy with a kind of like a surrey kind of thing. And then that building is a post office. I have a big interest in the Seminole Indian story, especially the ones that were the Cow Creek Indians that are in our region. And I collect postcards, and Tom did too. We had so much fun collecting all this stuff. We had a wonderful journey. But I had this photograph of Chief Tom Tiger. And I am not an academic, but I get all the academic writings, and I have thought they fell short, and they kind of got the story wrong. So this gives me a chance to kind of make a real resource that I have that nobody else seems to have. So I have a chapter on Tom Tiger, and he became quite a celebrity, and he was killed by lightning. And his son was DeSoto Tiger, who was killed by John Ashley, or supposedly killed by. So the Ashley story goes on, and DeSoto Tiger is mentioned, but I just like having a chapter on the Seminole Indians. This picture is John Danforth. I had a friend who did a book just on John Danforth, and it was called Chasing Danforth. And he lives in Maine now he's in Canada, but Tom and I went up and we visited the Camp Caribou. But this is Camp Caribou, still stands, and it's near Yardley, Maine, and even President Eisenhower went there. This was very popular, and so that was John Danforth's clientele, and he was a guide. We think that suicide, divorce, vandalism, shootings, it's happening now. It's been happening all along. And so John Danforth brings that big houseboat, which is floating hotel, made in Bath, Maine. He brought it down, and of course the waterway, which my daughter and her husband are doing now, was not so dredged, and they had a terrible time getting here and practically missed the season. So they had to go back to Maine, but they left the houseboat here, and it was vandalized and sunk. Somebody bored holes in it and sunk it. So he and his wife and his son come back the next season, and they find out to hire someone would just be astronomical. So they did it themselves with their friend, the wife, the son, John Danforth, and they brought it up and cleaned out all the, the wet mess, and they took the cabin of it and put it over in Palm City on the shore. And so this is the superstructure of that floating hotel. And Mrs. Murphy lived in it, Helen Murphy, and I had my designer, Heidi Rich, and Heidi, are you here? No, she's too busy. But I had her darken, it says the cabin up there, and I wanted to be able to read it in my book, so she kind of doctored that a little bit. But isn't it amazing that this was somebody's house and it goes back to the vandalized floating hotel? So just a refresher that we were in Dade County at first, and then we were in Palm Beach County. But when Chillingworth, who founded Palm City, came. We were in Palm Beach County when he was platting Palm City. But when he came to Florida, Juneau was the county seat of Dade County, and he came down from, he had just passed the bar. He studied the bar when he was like a school teacher on Merritt Island. And another funny thing, he was from Liverpool, New York, which is where my husband's from, Liverpool, New York, outside of Syracuse. So love these coincidences. So let's see, what do I have there about, that's just the county of Palm Beach County was created in 1909. But when Chillingworth came down, he was taking advantage of the Florida East Coast Railroad. It wasn't called that right at first, but that opened up South Florida, and he was in the law business and getting all the abstracts of title. Would you believe that this is the only picture of the Dade County Courthouse when it was in Juneau? But we have that picture when it was under construction, and that's it. That's the only one, and that's where Chillingworth's office was opened when he came down in the 1890s. This is Chillingworth. Now, a famous murder of Judge Chillingworth and his wife, that is his son that was murdered. But this is the one with the rectangle around it, is Charles Chillingworth, who had this dream of really making money in Palm City. And I thought that Palm City was unique, but it wasn't. They were doing this all over Florida. And what they were doing is taking the land that all the canal builders and railroad builders got. And they would get a deal on a big piece of land, and then they would hope to establish a town and make a lot of money. But poor Chillingworth had a terrible time, and he looked back on it and regretted it. Another thing I had, because I had a wonderful friend in the Gen Society in West Palm, and Tom and I were there, and she said, well, here, this is this unpublished memoir of Charles Chillingworth. And it was time to close, but she at least ran off the part that was about Palm City in Florida for me. And so I've had that to refer to. And to have Chillingworth's own words is really valuable. This is a historical marker, and notice it's a DAR one. Thank goodness for those ladies. And it was put up a year before I was born. That was a long time ago. And, but it tells about the Dade County Courthouse and being in Juneau. And isn't it hard to believe with the way Miami is now that the north part of Dade County had more power than Miami area? And for 10 years, from 1890 to 1900, the county seat was in Juneau, which doesn't even exist. That Juneau doesn't exist anymore. There's a Juneau Beach. Okay, here's Charles Chillingworth, and it tells how much land he bought. And then this is the way they would plat it. And so all those little lots, and Palm City Farm still exists today. And we have Mary Dawson here, who has the Palm City Farms at the corner of 714 and Citrus. And there she is, a former county commissioner. And she is in Palm City Farms, and it goes all the way out to I-95. It's huge. This was in his little brochure, which is not very slick, as you can tell. But Tom and I collected his own little brochure had pictures of packing citrus and this and that. And on the back, it had the contract. And in it was an exclusion clause, which land often had then. So maybe you notice that, and I look at this audience, that Palm City is very white even today. So I have a chapter on racial exclusion and the way a few people got the hold there. And Vicki Davis's husband just told me about knowing Pistol Pete. So I have a lot about Pistol Pete, who was Bill Matheson's beloved foreman. And so we have a section on that. And he is buried in Palm City. The Simmons family. Now, because I've so focused on the houses of refuge, I've been focused on the Simmons for many years. They were coming from Willoughby, Ohio, and the name Willoughby is just a coincidence. It's not our Willoughby, because Mr. Simmons was not doing well. He needed better climate, and almost so many people came to Florida because of that. And they were going to Miami. He was with his his new wife, and his 3 daughters, and their stepmother. And they got out on Captain Sewell, and we have Bruce here who portrays Captain Sewell. I wish I had him dress up. They stopped at Captain Sewell's dock, where all the riverboats stopped at that time. And Mr. Simmons got out to stretch his legs. I'm sure the girls got out. And so Captain Bessie was a keeper of the House of Refuge then. So, of course, he's like bored over there, and anytime the boat would come in and the mail would come in, he's over there lickety-split in his sailboat. And so when he met Mr. Simmons and he said he was going to Miami, he said, "Oh, don't go to Miami. Come over to the House of Refuge and live with me and help me build boats," because he was a boat builder and he did it while he was at the House of Refuge as their keeper. So they got out of the riverboat and they came here, and boy, have they changed our history, because even Ross Witham and our Witham of our airport, they are descendants of the Simmons. And this is Howard Schaefer. I asked him to paint the House of Refuge. I had photographs of the side, but not of the whole house before those upper windows were put on. Those upper windows were added about 1911, and Howard made this wonderful watercolor, which we have gotten a lot of mileage out of, to show what it looked like when the Simmons went over there. This shows the ditching for Palm City Farms and how empty it was, and how, they really were pioneers, and they had a terrible time trying to make a go of it because there was either too much water or too little water. And in that contract that Chillingsworth gave everyone, he guaranteed that it would be well drained. So that almost drove him crazy because he just couldn't accomplish that. Did I go to? Yeah. This building, and have you noticed some buildings like in Stewart right there? It's the law office right at the corner of St. Lucie and on Flagler. That buildings made with these old blocks. They were you would order, maybe a lot of you know this, but you would order these forms from Sears and Roebuck and make the blocks 2 at a time. And like our school that got knocked down when we built our new courthouse was made out of those blocks. They are indestructible. They are very heavy, like concrete blocks on steroids, and you can have different designs on them. You can, have different finishes, but most of ours look like this. And this was a hotel, and it was 3 stories, and people in Stewart went over there. It was really everybody's pride and joy, and it had Mrs. Corfin was English, and she knew how to put on a tea and make a good meal. Okay, here are the Laytons, and I know Georgian is, I'm sorry, this is very, the Laytons, and the Layton name has survived more than any of the other pioneers because there are 2 parks named for the Laytons, and then their descendants are still around too. So This shows them planting citrus. And so as the Gen Society, I was trying to figure out things, and I'm not as skillful as you genealogists. You know, I used to rely on Alice Luckhart for the fine tuning, and boy, do I miss her. But I was in the gen room getting help, and it was Mr. Lauren Jones that was in there helping me figure out the latent things, going back and forth. And he had the naturalization papers, and it said what he did, and it said he was a puddler. Does anyone know what a puddler is? I certainly didn't. I don't even think Lauren knew. But what it is in the furnaces in steel making that they stood in front of the open furnace to make iron, steel, you know, you've seen the pictures of what it's like an inferno. And it said that people usually only lasted into their 30s. It was such brutal, hard work. And so that's what Mr. Layton did up there. No wonder he wanted to come down here. But when things got bad, he had to go back to make money in the steel mills. So that was very interesting, and I wouldn't have known that piece of very interesting information if it hadn't been for the Gen Society. Am I going backwards? Yeah. Okay, here's that post office, and it's a copy negative that I got from Earl Rico, who's one of our local photographers, and I thought it was so wonderful that I used it. I republished a book on the chronology of Florida post offices that a lady in Jabril and her husband had done, and it's so valuable, and I didn't dare change it. It's like, remember when we used to do like mimeograph and, you know, cut stencils? That's the kind of printing it has in it, but the information is what they did by shining a projector onto a sheet and typing it. So now things are a lot easier for us, aren't they? But that's still valuable information, and nobody's quite replicated it. It's still handy, and it has a picture. The reprint I made has a picture of our little Palm City post office on the front. Now, there are only like 3 professional postcards that I know of Palm City. And they're sepia with red print. That's a certain kind of postcard. And so my designer, Heidi Rich, is putting them on the dust jacket because you can't see that red if it's inside, and there's so few. And one says near Stewart, 2 say near Stewart, another one is Stewart. And this one is Stewart because the Palm City Ferry is coming over to the First Street dock that is over like where Sailor's Return is now, still, you know, and they're getting off the Palm City Ferry. Here's the old bridge. The bridge over the St. Lucie was a concrete bridge, and it was completed in 1918. The one in Palm City was completed in the next year, and it was wooden, and they were made, according to Alice Luckhart and Greg, by the same person, was the contractor. You see that the little church was made out of those same concrete blocks, and like the women's club, and they collected money for each block, you know, like we have tiles that you put somewhere to, and put your name on it if you've been a donor. So the pioneers, you know, they built that church, and Mr. Coffin, the same person that built the hotel, he was a mason, a real mason, stonemason. He built the first little church, but it got blown over in the hurricane, and they built this bigger church. This church was the soul of Palm City. Everybody got married there, baptized there, went to Sunday school there, went to meetings there, and it was just so important to them. And then in 2012, it couldn't exist anymore because of debt, and it was sold, and now it's the Coastal Living Church, and the big, beautiful wooden sanctuary inside the sanctuary now has like It's like a climbing, a kiddie wonderland, and like at the Children's Museum. It is quite different, but it's very popular with those who attend. But it's not the Plum City history anymore. This photograph came from, this is Martin Highway, and Mary Dawson, who preserved Martin Highway, the beautiful linear cathedral part of it, she used these photographs, but they were taken by Edith Coventry, who was the grand aunt of the lady that came to the last meeting. And I've used those photographs, and like Mary has, other people have. We have at the Elliott Museum, we have the seal, the apparatus to make these seals. When we had several towns that incorporated during the boom. Plum City was even incorporated before the boom boomed, but we had Port Sewell, and we had Salerno, and we had Jensen that once incorporated, but they backed out pretty soon. It was too hard. And then almost 100 years ago, Governor Martin signed the bill creating Martin County, and by August 5th, we were underway. But and next year, we'll have our centennial, right, Joette? Hope we can celebrate it. But that highway was named after him, and they planned to bring it right over to close to where Sailor's Return is, where that dock was. That would have been a nightmare. Now, notice these photographers. They're taking a picture of a dredge on the canal, and this is no doubt Hill photographers. And they were, like the Seminoles are a passion, the House of Refuge, passion for me. And the Hill brothers, the Florida Photographic Concern, is another thing that just needs so much more attention and is so important history-wise locally. But they're taking pictures of the canal. And the first water came through in 1923. And just out of the blue, on Facebook, these photographs started appearing that this woman, Tutsi Kindberg, who lives in Plum City, had all along, and she never scanned them because she just forgot about them maybe, but now she scanned them and put them on Facebook. I could not believe them, and she had them all together, and there were 75 of them, and there were Hill photographs. And what it was is that the people that love that canal, the Commercial Club is what they called the Chamber of Commerce in that day, and it was Stanley Kitching. But they were so anxious, they were so thrilled with that canal, and they thought, we have more than anybody else. We have deep water, we have this big St. Lucie River, and we want a big port. And Bruce has, when he pretends he's Captain Sewell, he tells about how Captain Sewell, he was in on it. He pictured ocean-going vessels coming past Sewell's Point and we were almost Port Everglades. We almost were. They didn't have a way to have a PowerPoint like I'm having, They just had a stack of pictures, and all the important people, and what we call the Corps of Engineers, they just said the United States Engineers, met at the Lyric Theater. Before we even had the Lyric that we know, it was another Lyric, and they met to plead, please dig our inlet deeper, and please, we want this port. And they even dug the turning basin. And if you know what Sandsprit Park is, that is the sand they dug out for the turning basin for this giant port that, thank goodness, we never got. I mean, the best things that ever happened to us were the things that didn't happen. And that's why we are like we are today. And do you know, I mean, they were all in it. And it was like Ernie Lyons' father, Harry, he was a big booster for getting the new county and getting this big port. And you know this arch, and is Julie Priest in the, yes, Julie Priest is here. She has seen that this has been restored to look just like this, because a lot of towns had these arches, but only ours was more or less there. And she had it restored, and she and Doug Smith, Commissioner Smith, accomplished this. And do you see what it says? And my friend, Gloria Fike, said she didn't really ever understand that's what it meant, Atlantic Gateway to the Gulf of Mexico. We had that canal across our state, and we were so proud that we were the Atlantic Gateway to the Gulf of Mexico. How many of you have gone on that trip across the state? I haven't. Wasn't it kind of boring? I know. So here we are, and the locks, and they got improved, and those little houses were there. And I get into all of this in the book because they're all important. And this is Mary's accomplishment. Mary, stand up. It is a scenic highway. And just like Julie, when I said, Julie, that arch, it says Stewart, it doesn't say Rio, it says Jensen and Stewart. I mean, she did what was right. And I said, Mary, those trees aren't as old as you think. Look at these pictures. They are just like bare sand in 1925, but they became, because they were neglected. When you neglect things, they grow. And it was just, it's so beautiful, and she made sure they didn't widen it and make a thoroughfare, and it's just a wonderful thing. Thank you, Mary. And people in this room, and Vicky's husband's first name is, tell me your first name. Joe, okay, I thought it was Tom, but I just didn't. Joe Davis said he knew Bill Matheson personally, and he had a career, he just told me today before the meeting, in Florida Power and Light, and he said, I really think that I owe that career, because, he probably would have gotten it anyway, but he did get an interview with John Law, who is the big boss at that time, and recommended by Bill Matheson, and that was his career, which is certainly a good career with Florida Power and Light. But Bill Matheson, now in Miami, Key Biscayne, Matheson Hammock, Crandon Park, all of that is the Matheson family. Loganbody Key, I'm probably saying it wrong, they owned that, I think. And we don't have Boo Lowry in the audience, do we? Oh, there's Boo, yeah. Anything I'm missing that Bill owned? Boo was Bill's stepson, and boy, is he a valuable person when you're doing a book on Palm City. So, but they are such a fine, important family. And then, thank goodness that Bill came up here, and he bought land like his grandfather, who also was William Matheson. And so he bought a lot of what's Palm City. And this is a picture of his fields. And do you recognize anything that's still there? That tower is still there. It's right in the middle of the and today is the day I've been hearing it advertised. They're having like a fundraiser. I think it's the day for the college, and they're going to have breakfast, lunch, and dinner and golf all day for the benefit of the college, and it's right at the base of that tower. But there's a lot of development around it. And then this is another big thing to people who know it. So they went to the school, and it was first in Coconut Grove. She wanted to have an outdoor school with nature, and she applied in St. Augustine in Miami, and she's about ready to leave. But then the Ralph Monroe's family and his children first went to Miss Harris's school. She stayed there and taught them. And then it got so congested in Miami, and she was on Brickell Avenue, so she sold that land, and her mother had owned land in Palm City because she was a relative of Catherine Backus, and that's another chapter in the book because it's about flower growing in the very early days. But she came up here and built this, and this was done by Armstrong and Pryor. They designed these buildings, and she ran it for a few years. When she, as you see, she was quite elderly, and she wanted to turn it over to some people that were teachers there, I think, and they ended up leaving in the night and just leaving, you know, because I guess they couldn't make it work. And so Bill was always doing good things for people and bailing them out. He paid the teachers for the rest of the year, and then when Chapman School of Seamanship was just on like a Coast Guard cutter, and it needed a place to stay, he said, well, you can have, he had bought Miss Harris's land, you can stay here. So that's where Chapman School of Seamanship got a leg up and became what it is today. So I don't even know if I put the weight. Okay, this, I think I just wanted to say there's so much that is dredge and fill in Palm City, but that could be done in a certain era and cannot be done again. That was one of the earlier ones before Lighthouse Point and Seagate Harbor. And see, we have so many of these aerials that came from Art Runke and Earl Darrico, and then also Roger Conant, when he bought the Rico business, and his son Darcy organized them all. So have so many aerials for our book. So this shows the C-23 canal and Bessie Creek, and Boo knows all this stuff about the controversy with the bridge and Ed Miller owning the land, and then they had to reroute the traffic from Murphy Road to Map Road, but that's in the book. And here's when we finally got a high-rise bridge in Palm City. And what's funny, we always have these celebrations with bridges, but we didn't with this one. When they finished it, they just took the sawhorses away and started knocking the old bridge down. And so then they finally had a high-rise bridge. I think that's where I said about the seamanship, the Chapman School of Seamanship. Okay, this is a lovely aerial. You have to agree. But this is Pendarvis Cove. And this is a Matheson residence and some ranches. And Jackie, my daughter, just flew back from Annapolis because they were on a journey in their boat, and gave a talk at Sand Hill Cove, and that's where Sand Hill Cove is now. And what a wonderful place to be. But this is called Capri, and this is an interesting, and it's it has a chapter in it. See these canals? And Boo told me about it. He said, you know, he wanted to connect those to the river, and he didn't get county permit to do that. And so at this time, they said, well, you know, why don't you just make them water features? And he got permission to do a cemetery. And so that was the beginning of Forest Hills Memorial Garden. But the water, the canals to nowhere are very lovely and make it a very lovely place. Okay, to have this picture now, you're talking about how the Huguenots and you can't get myths away from stories and all. So there was an urban myth about Bill Watson. and how he worked at a filling station, and he bought all this land, and he made all this money. And then other people in our community wanted to do that, and they didn't quite pull it off like Bill did. But as fate would have it, I had this friend from Nashville who had this party, and her friend came and brought this big folder of aerial photographs that had been the M&W presentation piece of all the land that they had. So this is a story, and it's all verifiable, and he didn't realize, because of connections, I had a friend that lived in Wisconsin next to a house he was selling. They gave me the number off the sign. I called it and surprised him, and he talked before he thought about it, and I got the whole scoop before he decided, I don't know if I want you to write about this or something, because he's still doing land deals locally, I think. But he came as a young man from Wisconsin, and he said his father didn't want to be rich, but he wanted to be rich. His father would be happy with just retiring on Social Security and living just a normal life, but Bill wanted to be rich, and he would have these breakfasts with these heavy rollers, is that what you call them? And so one of them, even owned a sports team, and he really admired him, and one of them owned a bunch of filling stations down here. So they made Bill the manager of one right at the corner of Colorado and US 1. And so he would talk to the people that would come in. And one of them was the guy from General Development. And he said, how do you develop? How do you do this? And he said, well, you're sitting right in front of the best attorney for that sort of thing, Evans Crary. It's right in the bank building behind you. So Evans Crary really made it possible for Bill to do what he did. And this man that was a friend of my friend, Mr. Weber, said that he came here and saw all these signs that said, this land for sale, all on Hutchinson Island, everywhere. It said, this land is for sale, contact Bill Watson. And so he asked Randy Tilton, he said, well, who is this guy that has all this property? He said, well, he doesn't really have an office, but if you stay still, his car will probably come by. And it did. And when Mr. Weber saw what Bill Watson had in his trunk, all the options to buy, he knew he had friends in Nashville that had money. His good friend had just sold Kentucky Fried Chicken, and he was just needing to do something with that money. And so that myth, or I thought it was a myth, it was true. So, and this is the guy that had all the money, and that's what M&W is. It was Matheson and Watson and Massey. And when I was just growing up here, I thought it was Matheson, that M. I didn't know it was Massey. So this is out of one of the pages out of the book. And you see how he had how you do those little plastic things and put the letters in them? That's how he did the serial photo, and that's the land he had to sell in Palm City. But see, you can always recognize that because that's Lighthouse Point. But look at all of this. That's mostly Matheson. And he wasn't really a developer. He was a speculator, and he said that. So, but he and Massey started to get all the permits. And the way he got this, am I taking too much time? I'm gossiping, really. So the way he got the money for all these options is that his neighbors had the Harts had Holiday Mobile Home Park near the bank. And so he went and got, do you know where Leisure Village is at the circle right there on Monterey Road and Kenner? It's a mobile home behind he got it to change their, the permitting so it could be a mobile home park. And by the time he walked out of the commission meeting, somebody wanted to buy it. And so he got $400,000 himself out of that. So then he had enough money to put down on all the options. That's how he did it. So they developed Bill Matheson's original ranch as Crane Creek. And then when that was Bill and Mr. Massey, but they didn't really want to develop it all. They wanted to turn it over. And then it was just at the time when planning came in, and Mary knows all about this, but when they had the comprehensive plan and they were trying to plan realistically and wisely, then Peter Cummings came. And he wanted to develop it, and he had to go through all of the regulations. We had the Treasure Coast Planning Council then, and so then he was able to have deep enough pockets to wait until he got all the permits. And at first, the only thing he had to sell was Crane Creek, because that was the only thing permit. So then, to tie it all together, it's just too weird. When I was a young mother, and I'd take my children over for piano lessons from Mrs. Reinhardt, and she had this husband that was like, he's like always like, he was just wearing flip-flops, and he was overweight a little, and he was gruff. And it turns out that he was the man that really saved, and I wonder if Mary was going to save it too. They even got like a coffin to say, "Don't let Palm City die," because she moves here like everybody and didn't want it to change. She wanted to stay farms, and so did everybody else, but it wasn't practical. So Mr. Reinhardt thought, I want a funeral home, I want a bank, I want it to be a nice town. I think I'm going to start working with Peter Cummings. So he got as much as he could from Peter. They became really good friends. And so this is the little house that Mr. Reinhardt lived in where I came. And there is Mrs. Reinhardt. And they had this very famous daughter. They had the whole wall of pictures of her. She had gone to the University of Miami on a scholarship, and she was like a world-renowned, trumpet player, and she lives in Austria. And so I had thought I had enough on Mr. Reinhardt, but Carol said, "No, Sandra, you have to have Daddy's book." You know, he had like an album of all his articles, his letters to the editor. He was prolific. He became chums with Ernie Lyons even. He got all kinds of articles. And so Stuart would have swallowed Palm City if it hadn't been for Mr. Reinhardt, I guarantee you. I mean, he was the one that pretended that it had such a community there that they didn't want to have it a branch post office from Palm City. So they wanted to have their own zip code, their own post office, and you notice they have a big post office. And at that time, the people who lived in Lighthouse Point and all, they didn't even want to be in Palm City. They wanted to have a Stuart address. But things got changed and worked out, and so Palm City now is a place to be proud of, and it is growing, and it is quite wonderful. And so, let's see, I think that's it. Oh, these are the pictures that Mary Dawson has property right at the end of Map Road. And she said, "Sandy, the last property that belonged to the maps just sold." And I didn't want to bother. She said, "Look, Sandy, her phone number is right on the property record. Here it is." And so I contacted her, and it has been so heartwarming, and Ed Mapp was so important, and he was one of the first people aware of the degradation of our waterways, and they founded the Christian Science Church in their house. I mean, so many wonderful things, and I wouldn't have these if it wasn't for Mary Dawson. And so then we're about ready. We have the book designed, and then I hear from Josh Liller, will you stand up? So we were Jackie and I were at an archaeology meeting, and Josh was next to us, and then the next morning he says, "Sandy, there are some Palm City old photographs on eBay." And so there were. I mean, look down at the bottom, look what it says. The reason this person knew what it was somebody wrote on the pictures, and it had Palm City. And so when he posted them, Josh got an alert, because they also had a picture of the Royal Poinciana a hotel in Palm Beach, and he gets alerts for that. But he turned it over to me, and it's very wonderful that I got them. And so they're so pretty, we just added full bleed pictures for our book. Here's one of them. Can you believe that everybody in Stewart would go over there and have a picnic? Look at all that food. And that is when there was nothing in Palm City. It was just an appurtenance to Stewart. And this is my, Barbara mentioned my son, Todd, and his propensity to do maps and aerials and everything on it. But this is 1940 aerials pinned together, as only Todd can do. And we're spending so much on this book, much more than we could ever get out of it, because the end pages, usually people just leave blank end pages, but for a book our size, that's 24 inches of long picture you can have. So this is Bessie Creek in 1940. It looks like an oak tree. And the back one will be the South Fork and all, but this is our project. And the front, the dust jacket, we don't have a pretty colored postcard like the other books. So this is a painting by Jerry Rhodes, a very renowned artist that gets thousands and thousands for his paintings, but he happened to live right there in Palm City, and these palms are palms in Palm City, and he bought the land from Val Martin, and so he gave Val Martin this picture as a thank you for the real deal he got on this beautiful property in Palm City. And his former wife lives here today in Potts. So that's it.